Hi there, my name's Simon. Welcome to Motorcycle News. Welcome to a sunny Valencia in Spain, and welcome to the launch of Ducati's 2025 Multistrada V2S. Well, that has been a day riding Ducati's 2025 Multistrada V2S. And we've ridden it on all kinds of roads here in Valencia in Spain. We've had all kinds of weather too. We had rain this morning. We've had twisty roads, the classic Spanish blacktop. We've had quite a bit on the motorway. We've even had a little bit of urban riding as well. So we've done a bit of everything. Now, there's an awful lot to get through with this bike because it is completely new, pretty much. So I've got my notes with me here, so bear with me. I'll try and remember everything, but we're going to start off with the debut of the 890cc V2 engine. This is the first use of this engine. We're going to see it in the Panigale V2, we're going to see it in the Street Fighter V2, in a slightly different state of tune, but this is the first time we've had a chance to try it on the Multistrada. And I'm going to run through the spec, and then I'm going to tell you what it feels like. So, it's actually quite unusual to ride an updated model that has a smaller engine than its predecessor. The previous Multistrada V2 was based on the 950 Multistrada with a 937cc engine, and of course this is an 890, so it's actually shrunk a bit, but we'll get to that in a minute. So right, let's talk about the engine highlights. 890cc, short stroke, 90-degree V-twin. There's no Desmo valve gear, we've just got springs like the Multistrada V4. We've got no cam belts, it's cam chain, again like the Multistrada V4. We've got variable valve timing on the intake, again like the Multistrada V4. And Ducati say it's the lightest V-twin engine that they've ever built. And I would say they're probably right in that. Now, the power is 114 bhp at 10,750 RPM, which is pretty high. Now, its predecessor made 111 bhp at 9,000 RPM. So you can see there's quite a big difference there. This is a revvy engine. They've also kept peak torque roughly the same. It's a little bit less, but again, it's moved up the rev range. So it does kind of suggest that this engine is a little bit peakier than its predecessor. So there we go, the V-twin is smaller, it's lighter, it's more compact, and it's the same sort of performance as its predecessor. Service intervals, because I know people like service intervals, are the same as the previous V2, 9,000 miles or 2 years for your general service, 18,000 miles for the valve clearances, which is about half what it is for the V4. Don't know why that should be, maybe it's because it is a new engine. Right, so I've told you about the engine spec. How does it feel? It is the smoothest Ducati that I've ever ridden. It's the most civilized Ducati engine that I've ever ridden. And you can take that as a good thing or a bad thing. It doesn't feel as charismatic and as classically Ducati as you're used to. This thing is a contemporary engine. It feels lively, it does feel revvy, but I thought it might miss out on some of the bottom end because it is a smaller motor. But it doesn't, it's so light, and with the variable valve timing, the spread of power and torque is so wide that this thing just guns from all revs. So you can ride it from tick over, perfect fueling, it's really, really good fueling as well. Like most bikes these days, because of Euro 5, they have to be so emissions friendly that the fueling is really, really sorted. And it does feel great. Plenty of roll-on performance. Like I say, plenty of top end. It does like to rev, but it doesn't sound like a classic thumpety-thump V-twin. If you close your eyes, all right, it's not going to feel like a BMW F900, but it doesn't feel as V-twin as Ducatis usually do. The intake sound is quite muted. The exhaust note is quite muted. So yes, it's a lively engine, it's really easy to control, it's probably quicker than the old engine ultimately, but it's not quite as Ducati as the old engine. Again, that might be a good thing or it might be a bad thing. It probably opens it up to more people, but if you're a cognoscenti, a Ducatisti, maybe it's not quite as Ducati as you'd like. Anyway, chassis is also new. Let's go on to the chassis. We have an aluminium monocoque frame. Again, that is like the Multistrada V4, it's quite a familiar tail. We have a double-sided swing arm like the V4. We also have this sort of really lovely steel trellis subframe, which you can't see, but it's actually a gorgeous looking thing. It's a bit of a shame that. Would have been nice if it was showed off a bit more. Suspension-wise, we have two versions. The V2 is standard Marzocchi forks and shock, manually adjustable. And as before with the V2S, you get semi-active Marzocchis, 45mm forks at the front. You have the rear shock. I'll go through electronic spec later, but there are three sort of basic suspension modes. Now they're separated from the riding modes. There's a separate button for them, so you can adjust suspension independently of your riding mode, and there are three of them. But as usual with Ducati, you can do a really deep dive, and at standstill you can go into the menu and take your dynamic mode, and you can set it to be really hard or really soft or anywhere in between. There's a lot of detail in the programming that you can do with this bike. So right, where were we? Chassis. Yeah, let's talk about preload as well. Again, like the V4, the V2 has a button assigned to preload, so you can lower preload as you're coming into standstill. It only takes about 8mm off the rear of the bike. That might be enough if you're on tiptoes. There is a huge amount of adjustability with seat heights. I'll get onto the riding position in a minute. Geometry wise, we've got shorter wheelbase, we've got sharper steering, and we've got less trail than before. So the bike is shorter, more compact, more aggressive is the wrong word, but it is more sporty, I guess you'd say. It's still on the 19-inch front, 17-inch rear on Pirelli Scorpion Trail 2s. And the brakes are one of the few things that are pretty similar to the old bike. I think it's the same set of Brembo calipers. But again, things like the V4 Multistrada, cornering ABS now has 3 different levels depending on your riding conditions. So, and I better mention weight as well. That's a really big thing. Ducati say it's the lightest engine. It's also a much, much lighter bike. And there's a little bit of confusion about the weight, because the figure that Ducati now claim is the wet weight without the fuel. And they say that's 202 kilos for the V2S. If you add the weight of 19 litres to that, it comes out around about just over 216 kilos. And then if you take the weight of the old bike and subtract it, it comes to 8 kilos lighter. And Ducati say that it's 18 kilos lighter. I'm not sure where they got that figure from. I don't know. It feels more like 18 because it does feel so much lighter than the old bike. So let's talk about the suspension. Let's talk about the handling. It is, like the engine, it is sharper, it's more aggressive, it's sportier, it's more dynamic. You can tell it's so much lighter instantly because of the way the bike rolls through corners. It tends to flick. It hasn't got that old Ducati Multistrada feeling of being slightly gangly. There was always something quite sort of loose and organic about the old bike. This feels much more stable. There's much less movement. Again, you wouldn't mistake it for a Tiger 900 GT Pro. You wouldn't mistake it for a BMW because it is definitely a Ducati. It's definitely got a sporty edge to it, but it is kind of reined in. It does feel much, much more civilized. What else can I think about in terms of handling? In terms of ride quality, again, it feels really good. You can set, if you set from dynamic suspension mode down to the sort of the standard mode, you can feel that the ride quality doesn't diminish. It sort of, when you go into sporty mode, it sort of stretches the bumps out a bit. So you get undulations happen quicker in sporty mode, and then if you hit the same undulation in a lesser suspension mode or a lower suspension mode, it sort of just evens it out a little bit. Anyway, yeah. So let's get on to riding position and ergonomics, because that's another big thing that's changed. We have the same seat height, I think it's 830 to 850 mil, I think, yes, as before, but it's redesigned, it's slimmer. The bike is so much slimmer because of this aluminium monocoque chassis, which makes the seat height effectively lower, because although it's the same height, the reach to the ground is a much straighter line. And you can really tell, especially doing low-speed U-turns, the thing's got a really good steering lock, and it's so well balanced, you can just dive around. So yeah, it is slimmer. The tank is a litre smaller, but it's a lot flatter as well, and it's got a new seat. So where the old seat used to be scalloped and kind of run into the tank, now you sort of, well, you used to sit in the old bike. It was very much almost like an old sort of, like this kind of position, very sat upright. With this bike, you're sat much more on top of it, much more canted forward. So again, it is a sportier riding position. I think the bars are slightly further forward, and I think they're slightly lower relative to where you sit. You sort of have a lot of cockpit space. It feels like there's more cockpit than the old bike. The old bike had a slightly steeper screen that sort of raked back. This thing's a bit more upright. The screen, still adjustable, is quite stubby, but it looks better quality. I think the plastic is thicker. It doesn't flap around as much. You also have these wind deflectors here, which really do help a lot. So the old bike was quite buffety. This one, you can still hear the wind noise, and I would still fit one of those sort of visors on the top. But in terms of actual turbulence, I thought it was pretty good on the motorway. Felt fine to me. So yeah, you've still got the big wide leverage at the bars. The seat, I'm not convinced about. The old seat was much wider here. It's quite flared, and it's sort of, for the gentleman with the larger posterior, it was quite comfortable. This one, it's a lot slimmer, and I found that at the end of the day, it was just starting to ache a little bit. Ducati say that the seat for the pillion has been redesigned as well, so the pillion gets more space. Haven't had a chance to try it with a pillion, but again, it looks a little bit slimmer to me, a little bit less wide than the old seat. Right, so that's where we are really. Electronics and accessories. This thing's got the lot. It's got rider mode. Now it includes a specific wet mode, a rain mode, which is good. So you don't have to sort of set something up specifically. You just go for the wet mode. Cruise control is standard. The quick shifter is standard. Heated grips are not. That's a bit of an omission. Obviously you can get panniers. You can either get plastic panniers that clip in here, or you can get aluminium panniers that come on a sort of a big rail, as you'd expect, as standard. You can also get wire spoke wheels for it. Personally, I love wire spoke wheels, especially on a 19-inch front. And finally, rabbiting away, we get to the price. It's premium. So the V2, without the semi-active, is £14,167. The V2S is £16,562. Now its 19-inch front wheel tall rounder rivals might include Triumph's Tiger 900 GT Pro. Comes with more stuff as standard, like heated grips, heated seat, fog lights, and it's $14,095. If you add panniers and a top box to that, you're still cheaper than the standard Ducati, but it's not as fast, doesn't have the same kind of pinpoint handling, doesn't have semi-active, or it's not quite as sophisticated in its electronics. Or there's Yamaha's Tracer 9 GT, which doesn't have heated seats, but comes with panniers and heated grips and all the rest of it, and that's $14,350. Again, lots of go in it, but it's not quite as good looking as the Multistrada. So there we go. So $16,562 is a premium price for this bike. It's right at the top of its range. I think it's a better bike than the old V2S. I actually think you could even make an argument for saying it's better than the V4 Multistrada. Obviously, it's not as powerful, but it is more manageable. It is lighter. It is easier to get on with. So there we have it. Right. That is Ducati's Multistrada V2S. All that remains for me to say is read MCN every week. The review of this will be in shortly. Read Bike Magazine, it's going to be in there as well. And thank you very much for watching.